Scientism exposed.
It might come to a surprise to most people that one of the most dangerous worldviews one can hold is scientism. The failing of science is not really about the scientific method. It is about a largely unrecognized epistemology that developed as a result of the successes of science. This faulty epistemology can be called scientism, and we should make a sharp distinction between science and scientism. Science is a method of inquiry and the knowledge acquired by that method. The scientific method involves hypothesizing, experimenting, observing, and drawing conclusions. Central to the method of science is that no theory is ever considered final. All theories are subject to scrutiny and re-examination, and it is assumed that all will eventually be proven false by a more comprehensive theory. Scientism, on the other hand, is the belief that the methods of science are superior to any and all other methods of determining truth. Science believes things because they have been observed to be true. Scientism believes things because science says they are true. Most of us are guilty of scientism to some extent. We hear about things having been scientifically proven and we assume that means they must be true. We didn't do the experiments. We didn't look up the results. We didn't analyze the data. We simply assumed that if the science proved it, it must be true. As humanity emerged from the Middle Ages, a battle began to rage between the fathers of the church and the new intellectuals of the Enlightenment. That struggle continues today, even though it had seemed for a time that the debate was over and that the science was settled.
We will restore science to its rightful place and wield technology's wonders.
The issue is that science is no longer science. True science is simply the scientific method or empirical data. What is commonly called science these days is actually just the religion of the world, full of fabrication and an anti-God agenda.
The debate is over. The science is settled.
Exposing scientism for what it is, you have science and then you have non-science. And nowadays you have a lot of stuff that's masquerading as science, and there's a force behind that. There is an adversary that we have in this creation that sets about to lie about everything.
I see scientism as a spiritual agenda. I see it as a spiritual deception. It's something that has been put in place and masqueraded as fact and as reality, when in fact most of the things that are paraded today are theories of men.
The deception will pull you any direction, and this is where scientism is. I think this is the whole purpose of scientism. I think there are dark forces behind it trying to pull people into what they think is logic, and it's really speculation. It's really theory. It's not as concrete as everybody thinks it is.
Science is great. Scientism, however, is a religion, is a belief system. Scientism assumes that science is the controlling reality about life, so anything that can be validated scientifically ought to be done. Other things are subjective fantasy, like love, beauty, good, evil, conscious, and ethics. Science, which originally simply meant the study of the natural world, has in this view become conflicted with scientific naturalism, materialism, and a philosophy that the natural world is all that exists. Humans are reduced to objects that can be inspected, experimented on, and ultimately controlled. In 1922, G.K. Chesterton warned that scientism had become a creed taking over our institutions, a system of thought which began with evolution and has ended in eugenics. Again, remember, there's science and there's scientism. What have you fallen for? What have you believed in? Has it been real science or has it been scientism?
We no longer feel ourselves to be guests in someone else's home and therefore obliged to make our behavior conform with a set of pre-existing cosmic rules. It's our creation now. We make the rules. We establish the parameters of reality. We create the world. And because we do, we no longer have to justify our behavior, for we are now the architects of the universe. We are responsible to nothing outside of ourselves, where we are the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever.
Darwin considered this by far the strongest single class of evidence. This textbook says, the human embryo growing in the mother has gills like a fish. Those little folds of skin are not gills. Those little wrinkles under your chin when you're growing up later develop into bones in the ear and glands in the throat. They never have anything to do with breathing. I've seen folks that have 5 or 6 chins and they can't breathe through any of them but the top one. Those are not gill slits. Ernst Haeckel, though, said the turning point in his thinking was when he read Darwin's book. He made huge charts of his posters of his drawings of these embryos and traveled all over Germany and just about by himself converted the Germans to believing in evolution. Haeckel took a drawing of a dog and a human embryo and he changed them to make them look exactly alike. On top are Haeckel's fake drawings. Underneath are actual photographs of what he claimed he was drawing a picture of. Now, either he's a lousy artist or he's a liar. Well, it turns out he's a liar. He was convicted of fraud by his own university, proven to be a fraud. But guess what? Haeckel's fake drawings are still used in textbooks in your state right now. It's only been proven wrong 125 years ago. I know it takes a while to get textbooks up to date, but that ought to be plenty of time. Adolf Hitler said, you let me control the textbooks, I'll control the state.
You have science. You have true science, which is actual knowledge, things that are repeatable, testable, observable, different facts and things that you can really dig into as reality. But then you've got this thing in modern day society called, it's referred to now as scientism. It's a lot of theology dressed up as science. And it needs to be exposed. Because as Christians, we want to focus on the truth. We want to focus on God, face Him, and just ignore all the distractions. But while we're facing God and we're observing that, we also need to be aware of what the distractions are so that we can help others understand. And so we want to expose the lies for what they are.
As the saying goes, the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing the world that he didn't exist. And to do that, he has to first convince the world that God doesn't exist. And through science, I think he's achieved it. Through scientism, science itself is a beautiful thing. But scientism, when it turns into a theology, when it turns into a religion, that is when it's a very bad thing.
Our culture's materialistic worldview is rooted in scientism. According to scientism, if something is not rational or not verifiable through the physical senses, then it is not real. We see then that scientism blinds us to everything in reality that is beyond the scope of the scientific method, no matter what the method may reveal to us. So, how much of reality is left out? Almost all of it. Make no mistake, the very foundation of all mankind's knowledge depends on what is believed to be the truth about the origins of all that exists. No one can go further back than the beginning in a search for the true origin of all that exists. Therefore, whatever one believes is the truth about the origin of everything automatically becomes the foundation upon which all other knowledge is processed.
In the beginning, there was darkness, and then bang, giving birth to an endless expanding existence of time, space, and matter.
And they know the biggest problem with that is how can you have something come from nothing? So now you have these scientists that start talking really nutty, like the biggest problem with cosmology today is nothing. You've heard that probably.
Essentially, you can get a universe from nothing without any supernatural shenanigans. That basically, by quantum mechanics and the laws of physics we understand in principle, an entire universe with 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars, can come from nothing because its total energy could be zero, and therefore you don't need to literally violate any laws of physics to create a universe. And no, we don't know that for certain, but even that possibility is amazing, and I find it worth celebrating the fact that we can probe such things, and we shouldn't be afraid of a universe that maybe has no purpose, because we create our own purpose, and our own purpose adds more meaning to our lives. It means our brief moment in the sun matters because that's the only moment we have.
Which it means that everything came from nothing, and then exploded. So when you really drill this stuff down to the basics, it doesn't make much sense. But since you're hearing this 24/7 and all the school systems teach it, nobody even thinks to question it.
And so you have this same thing in the mainstream science world, scientism. You have people that are studying cosmology and astronomy and physics and chemistry and biology and all this stuff, but a lot of times they're not even studying the real thing. Instead, they're just studying what somebody else has said about it. And then those people, they know stuff based on what somebody else had said. And so it keeps building on, the deception keeps going until finally, every once in a while, somebody in the middle of that wakes up and starts to look at the evidence and says, hey, wait a minute, this is not lining up with what we're teaching and what we're believing. Something's wrong. And of course, then that guy is immediately ousted. Not just for challenging the authority, because that can be a good thing. Sometimes they like that. But if you're challenging the authority and bringing in real truth, that they don't like.
It was a paradigm shift. There is now another way to explain the naturally occurring phenomena around us, and this is science.
Since the Middle Ages, scientists have developed sophisticated new theories about the enormity of the universe and our place in it.
God is an ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance.
It really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. You are all stardust. You couldn't be here if stars hadn't exploded, because the elements, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, all the things that matter for evolution, weren't created at the beginning of time. They're created in the nuclear furnaces of stars, and the only way they can get into your body is if the stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus. The stars died so that you could be here today. Okay? And anyway.
Pythagoras identified numbers as the most fundamental elements of creation.
As we look at science in this day and age, we're finding that the whole world is filled with these mathematical constants. You've got pi, you've got the speed of light, you've got the force of gravitation. So the idea that numbers describe the world seems to be the case.
He wanted to produce philosophers like himself. So you had to be very circumspect, you had to be very self-controlled to be able to even be in his school.
Pythagoras turned the numbering system of the Babylonians into a sacred science.
They believed that number was like God. And to connect with this was to be talking to God. And so from that arises a whole lot of symbolism that later becomes numerology, Kabbalah, things like that.
So the long and the short of it is that the Pythagorean mysticism, fetching disguised as something scientific, reduced practically everything to mathematical numbers. Does that ring any kind of bell in our information age, frequently called the digital age? Because factual math is so dependable, so exact, so capable of producing technological marvels, people have had very good reason to trust anything that is said to be mathematical supportable. The general belief is that both math and science are strictly objective enterprises and strictly secular tools in the hand of a rather elite band of altruistic laborers for mankind. The theoretical science establishment has cultivated the image that it is uniquely removed and aloof from any contamination by philosophies and religions. The establishment's mantra is that mathematics and science represents a dedicated search for truth.
Archaeology is the search for fact, not truth. If it's truth you're interested in, Dr. Tyree's philosophy class is right down the hall. So forget any ideas you got about lost cities, exotic travel, and digging up the world. We do not follow maps to buried treasure, and X never, ever marks the spot. 70% of all archaeology is done in the library, research, reading. We cannot afford to take mythology at face value.
And dark matter is a great example. The whole idea of dark matter came from the idea that galaxies spin too fast. They spin so quickly that the observable matter, which is based on light, it's the light that we can see from the galaxies, that there isn't enough mass there, that they're spinning so fast that they should fly apart based on the conservation of angular momentum. So we've made this assumption that there's more mass there that we can't see, and that's what dark matter is. That's where it comes from. It's based on that assumption that we see these things out there in space that are, very, very far away, and that they're spinning so fast, and there's all this mass there that it defies the basic laws of physics here on Earth. And so, besides the idea that might not even be true, that those things might not be that far away, we're forcing things in the night sky to have to comply with our physics here on Earth. Now, that in itself is an enormous assumption, but besides that, dark matter comes from that assumption. So we just build assumptions upon assumptions. And then dark energy, the other one that is supposed to make up an enormous amount of our universe, this dark energy comes from assuming that the law of gravity is true, because gravity says that all masses attract all other masses, but we have this infinitely expanding space. Everything's moving away from each other, but supposedly some calculations were done, I think in the 70s, that showed that long ago, since the Big Bang, they assumed Big Bang happened, that all of the masses should have started pulling each other back together, that all of these galaxies and everything should be coming back together into one big mass. But calculations have shown that's not true, or the theory is that there's this dark energy that's pushing all of the galaxies apart. So it's counteracting this assumed force of gravity. So now we assume that there's another force that's pushing them all apart. And not only that, is galaxies appear to be disks, whereas gravity would want to make things spherical, or make things orbit in a spherical type state. So the dark energy is not only pushing all of these galaxies away from each other and arranging them in weird ways that doesn't really seem to make sense, it's also flattening galaxies into disks to give them the shape. So we have this mysterious force called dark energy. That's where these theories come from. They're based on assumptions based on assumptions, and it's really, like I said, it's kind of a house of cards. And so I started, I didn't realize it, but at the time I started imagining men in lab coats just figuring these things out. And it's like, who are these people? And now I look at this, when I see this stuff now, that scientists have a new theory on semi-radial tachyons or something I saw recently, about how those are some new particles they're finding. And I see these men in these white lab coats, and I kind of laugh to myself, like, who are these people? They're never really described to us, and there's just all these theories, all these crazy things that just come up in the news about science this and science that. And don't get me wrong, I love science, but scientists, it's like they're priests almost, and it's getting out of hand. And so we really gotta just take a step back. Wait a second here. We're in dreamland here. There's a book I'm reading by a man named Lee Smolin, who's a theoretical physicist, just saying, whoa, we got to back up and get back to testable, scientific method physics. And it doesn't seem like mainstream science wants to go that route. It really seems like they want to keep all of this theoretical stuff that really, to me, is just kicking the can down the road, avoiding the question, who made this? Just add more and more time, more and more billions of years, more and more expanding infiniteness that has no explanation, no beginning, no real beginning, at least.